humanist perspective presented by the New Orleans Secular Humanist Association, following our few principles of humanism.
We're committed to the use of science and reason for understanding the universe and for solving human problems. We're skeptical of untested claims of knowledge, but we're open to new ideas.
We are concerned with securing justice and fairness in society and in ending intolerance and discrimination. We are committed to the total separation of religion and government.
We affirm humanism as a realistic alternative to the theologies of despair and the ideologies of violence. We reject the concept of an afterlife and believe in living a full and rewarding life here and now.
We value and respect each individual's right to judge and lead their lives according to their own position, as long as it's respectful of other people, living in a free society.
We hope you enjoy today's program and others in the weeks to follow. Hello and welcome again to our show. I'm Harry Greenberger. I'm the president of the New Orleans Secular Humanist Association and the host for this show. There's a monthly event which I attend regularly called the Gillespie Breakfast at the First Unitarian Church here. And the general purpose there is networking, and people come in representing themselves or groups and talk about what they do, invite us to their events, and we get to know each other. And that was where I first became acquainted with Patricia DeMichele, also called Patty, I presume, and the organization which she was representing, which is the Advocacy Center. And so I would like to start by asking either. And we also have, in addition to Patricia, who is one of the president of the board of directors, and Lois Simpson, who is the founder and executive director of Advocacy Center. Am I correct? All right. So I'll let either of you start by just telling us about the history, the background of, where'd you come from and why are you here?
Well, I'll jump in there. The Advocacy Center was formed in 1978. Quite a while ago now, and it was in response to a federal law that established protection and advocacy systems throughout the United States. And so we are the protection and advocacy system for Louisiana. We're a private nonprofit. We serve the whole state, and our job is to protect, empower, and advocate for people with disabilities in Louisiana. We also serve senior citizens, and especially those residing in nursing homes and seniors in 3 parishes: Plaquemines, Orleans, and St. Tammany.
If I understand what you're saying, you're the voice for people and groups who might otherwise not have a voice. Is that your mission generally?
That's a very good way of putting it, yes.
All right. Well, I didn't mean to interrupt. Go ahead.
So we were formed back then, that's about 34 years ago, and since that time, we started with an office here in New Orleans. Since that time, we have expanded our services so that we now have offices in Lafayette, Baton Rouge. We have a presence in North Louisiana via people working out of their homes. We have a staff of 58 at this point.
Wow, that's a costly venture.
It is, and as I say, we grew from original staff of 4 to 58. So,
well, since you said it was mandated by the federal government, do they fund it?
Partially. We have had started with this one program serving people with what is called developmental disabilities. And then we expanded so that now we serve people with all types of disabilities, whether it be mental illness, physical disabilities, which may have occurred because of an accident or trauma or disease. And so our services have expanded since those early days to include a lot more people. And yes, and the federal government still funds about 60% of our work.
And the
rest is either state funding or private funding.
In other words, and you're a nonprofit organization, so you do enjoy contributions, tax-deductible contributions?
We do. We very much enjoy contributions.
Well, our organization is also, a nonprofit tax deductible, so we understand that kind of need for help.
Yes.
All right. Well, to clarify for me, you apparently step in when some of these otherwise disadvantaged people are in trouble or need some help or discriminated against or whatever. Do you, on a more positive note, try to improve their life conditions? Because you see, our organization, the New Orleans Secular Humanist Association, our philosophy is that since we're only going to have this life that we're living now, that everyone should try to live his life to the fullest, without infringing on anyone else's rights. So I assume you are also assisting people to get the most they can out of life, even though they may have some disabilities. Am I correct?
I think that's a very good way of putting it. The work that we do, either for individual clients with their individual problems or larger problems that larger numbers of people with disabilities or seniors are having, is all about living with dignity, living with safety, maximizing their potential, being included in the ways that you and I are included. And that really is what we do. We do it in a variety of ways. Some of it's individual representation where we represent that one client. More often than not, we take on systems that aren't doing what they're supposed to be doing. They're supposed to be helping and offering services to our client base, and they're not, or they're doing it
What
wrong.
are some of those systems?
The Medicaid system that pays for health and long-term care, and also pays for mental health treatment and therapy.
But you're saying that they sometimes drop the ball, or
When you're in times like these where there are a lot of cutbacks, and I'm sure you're well aware of both the state and the feds, but particularly at the state level, when there are cutbacks, one of the ways they do that is to narrow the people who are eligible, or they lower the payment to the providers, and then the providers drop off the Medicaid program.
Yes.
And so the services that our clients often rely on, like maybe a little in-home help for a senior or a person with a disability, so they don't have to go to costly institutions, and so they can be part of their community.
so you handle those individually and as a group?
We do basically three things. We can represent people individually, what we are more effective at, because that takes one-on-one takes a lot of resources.
Yes.
But if you find out that there's a pattern that is being followed in how they're reducing eligibility or not serving our clients, then you can take on the system itself for all of the people who fall into that category. And that's a lot more effective than just one and waiting for the next one.
So you mentioned Medicaid. What other systems may fall through the cracks?
Well, right after Katrina, if you remember, people were waiting for the first trailers to come so that they could have a place to live, and people anxiously waited for that. And when the first ones arrived north of Baton Rouge, not one of them was accessible to somebody who had a mobility impairment who couldn't climb up the stairs to the trailer. So we started, contacting. We never jumped to litigation. That's not our first recourse at all, but we contacted FEMA and we started dialogue with FEMA, and nothing was happening, and so we finally had to sue FEMA, and that case was settled, and FEMA agreed to provide accessible trailers, not only for Katrina, but for all other disasters from then on. And we worked with them for quite a while in the design of these trailers and what would actually work for people with mobility issues.
Well, prior to your lawsuit, they were saying that they had no requirement to do that?
Yes, unbelievably, because the Americans with Disabilities Act was passed way back in 1990 and clearly says that, when you're spending federal money, you have the obligation to make things accessible for people with disabilities.
All right. Well, so suppose that you never run out of projects that require your attention. What are some of the others?
Well, right now we're looking at some issues of what we call serious neglect in group homes that serve people with developmental disabilities, mental retardation primarily. And we'll be coming out with a report on our findings very soon, I hope within the next month. So, I mean, that's an area where I think people think, oh, somebody is going to a group home, they'll be safe there. And while there are some good group homes, I am not saying that they are all like this. We are uncovering many throughout the state that are so, they would really bother you if you saw the conditions in these places.
Are these private group homes or public? Are they publicly funded?
They're publicly funded, but they're generally privately operated. As you probably know, our state and many, many other states are privatizing more and more services for people who need services from the state. And, you know, we could probably argue for quite a while whether that's a good thing or a bad thing. But one thing you have to remember when services are privatized, there is a profit motive there for the people providing the service.
Yes.
And I think sometimes, and again, it depends on the provider, but sometimes that profit motive can take precedence over good services for people.
I agree with you that sometimes that is the case. Being a free enterprise capitalist supporter myself, very often the profit motive will provide superior service because they want to get more and more customers. So I think it probably works both ways.
I think you're right, and honestly, I think when services are provided by the state, you sometimes have the same problems.
Yes.
I think what we often forget in our delivery of services is that services, no matter who they're provided by, need somebody monitoring those services and calling people to task when the services are not quality services.
And is there no state agency which is supposed to monitor those homes?
That's a good question. There is a state agency, terribly underfunded and understaffed. And so when these issues are brought to that state agency's attention, often little is done to correct the situation. So that's where the Advocacy Center comes in.
Well, now you have been around how many years now?
About 34.
Are people with disabilities and old people, are they better off today than they were, say, 20 years ago?
Well, Patty and I were just talking about that before we started talking with you, and I think in some ways, definitely people are better off. All these laws that have been passed, like I mentioned, the Americans with Disabilities Act, the Fair Housing Act, and other civil rights protections for people, definitely a step in the right direction. But in some ways, I mean, as you're now cutting back services, you have a senior citizen who's living on Social Security. Everything is more expensive now than it used to be.
Yes.
And then when you're relying on some state-provided services and they're being cut back, I mean, where do you turn? So I think in some ways it is more difficult for older people and people with disabilities.
Well, aside from today, looking forward to the future, and if you follow the current politics and the people who would like to run the country, there's a lot of talk about cutting back even more, even into Social Security. What does that do for your organization? I mean, how do you counteract that kind of thing?
Well, I think public education is part of it. I think there's a lack of understanding how Medicare and Social Security are funded and that it's causing problems with the debt. It isn't. And there are fixes, but that's not what we do. I mean, we represent people who are having problems with those systems. So the philosophical aspect of it, when you ask us about are we better off? No, because there are threats of the cutbacks, but yes, because of technology, yes, because there is a growing understanding of the aging process. and what people need to live safely in their communities, not just health care, not just Social Security, but how can you live safely in your own community. And so there's those kinds of steps we're taking in the right direction. My fear is that we're going to start seeing a lot more frail elderly who are forced into nursing homes because they don't have incomes adequate to support them living individually, and can't get the state-sponsored services to give them that little bit of help in their home. And that would then go counter to the trend over the last 20 years of keeping people in their homes for as long as possible, because that's what they want.
Well, looking ahead for potential cuts in services and continued inflation, is your organization going to be able to handle all of that?
Well, that's one of the, honestly, that is a worry that we have, because these constant threats, I mentioned about 60% of our funding comes from the federal government. We have seen a decrease in the past 5 years. And you can absorb this little one and that little one, and then eventually it adds up, and it means staff, and staff means that you can't provide as many services. So our board has really taken an aggressive stance in trying to raise private funds to make up the difference.
I see, which is not an easy thing to do.
It is not easy.
Well, we all wish you great success. Now, I see in the material I had about you that your staff is approximately 60 people. What do the people on your staff do?
Well, we have staff, we have the normal administrative staff who do keep track of the money and, keep everybody on target with timekeeping and all of that. But the staff who really provide the services are a combination of attorneys, and we have actually 12 attorneys on our staff. And then we have a group of people we call client advocates who are not attorneys, but who assist people up to what a non-attorney can do. And they all work under the advice of an attorney, by the way, so we never have anyone practicing law who is not an attorney.
All right.
And then we have a group of people we call ombudsmen, and they visit people in, as I mentioned, these group homes and other residential facilities where people receive care and treatment. And their job is to go in to get to know folks living in these situations. And some of these folks are nonverbal. Some of them, have speech impediments. Some of them have severe mental retardation. So they learn ways to communicate with these folks and to get to know what their needs and wishes are, and to help them realize their wishes. Also, our desire is that by getting to know folks living in these places, that they will feel comfortable enough with the ombudsman so that if something is happening in that facility that should not be happening, they will tell the ombudsman, who can then take action, report it to that state licensing group that I mentioned, and take further action to make sure that whatever is going wrong is corrected.
A part of their function is to evaluate the quality of service in those various establishments. Are you welcomed by the management of those groups, or do you have a fight on your hands?
We sometimes have a fight on our hands, but the Advocacy Center is a very unique organization in that by federal law we have access to these places. We also have access to client records when we have probable cause to believe that some neglect or abuse has occurred. So this access authority that is granted to us by the federal government is huge. And so if a facility says, "Why are you here?" and we don't want you here, we can go back and show them the law, and they usually figure out that they should let us in.
I see. Well, I'm assuming that over the years, your ombudsman turn up many deficiencies, which you proceed to get corrected. Give us some examples of what the kind of conditions you run into.
Well, we were looking at some child residential care facilities. This is a discrete group of facility, I should say, throughout Louisiana that houses children. They're usually anywhere from 12 on up to 18 who live in these places. And they're usually children who, for one reason or another, cannot live with their families. Either they've been taken away from their families, or the families have determined that they cannot care for them anymore. And many of them are wards of the state. And so we started visiting these facilities, and we uncovered some appalling conditions and are still working on some of those conditions. For example, children not going to school, being kept in the facility with a very inadequate educational program in the facility. We uncovered conditions like one of our ombudsmen went into a facility in the winter and there was no heat, or there was one little heater and the wiring was faulty. We have seen children who don't have a mattress on the bed or sleeping on the box spring. And so, I mean, everything from really poor physical conditions to, like I said, lack of an education, lack of mental health treatment, lack of medical treatment. So
are they properly fed?
Sometimes that's a problem too. We've gone into facilities where there was only some white bread in the refrigerator and nothing more, and they had run out of money for the month, and so, you know, there was no food available.
About how many young people are in facilities like that in Louisiana?
In those child residential care facilities, we have about a little over 1,000.
Oh, really?
Mm-hmm.
In how many different facilities are those 1,000?
I'm trying to remember my numbers, but I think there are about 45 to 50 throughout
Wow,
the
and
state.
a number of them are here in the New Orleans area?
There are some here. There are a lot in central and north Louisiana.
Are some parts of the state in those facilities better than other parts of the state?
You know, I couldn't, no region stands out to me as being wonderful.
All right. When you mentioned the number of attorneys on your staff, and you also said that you prefer not to file lawsuits, what do they do?
Well, they do file lawsuits. I mean, when I said that, I just meant that we definitely always try to negotiate out a problem before filing a suit. But we do have several suits in process right now. But a lot of our, a lot of lawyer time is the same as it is in a private law firm. In most private law firms, 80% of the work is not litigation. It is negotiation. It's informing people of the law and what their responsibilities are under the law, and through that process getting entities and people to do what they should do.
Now, do you sometimes find that you and the ACLU are facing the same kind of problem, and do you handle it jointly or individually? Or?
We actually did have a suit with the ACLU, I think it was last year, in which we filed suit against the state of Louisiana for keeping people in ordinate times. These are people with severe mental illness.
Yeah.
And I don't know if your audience knows, but the prison and jail system is a big part of our mental health system right now, because people with mental illness are out on the streets without proper services, and so they eventually get picked up by the police and wind up in jails and prisons.
Where they get no treatment, no counseling.
And the jails and prisons, I mean, they are not set up to be mental health treatment facilities. So, really, we can't expect that they would provide the kind of treatment that these folks need. At any rate, there were people being kept in the Tangipahoa jail for inordinate periods of time, and so we filed suit, and again, that suit was settled, and the state has agreed to move those people into a forensic facility within, I think it's 30 days is what we agreed on. So we felt that was a very successful suit. We also, in addition to working with the ACLU on that case, we worked with a private law firm called Kirkland and Ellis, which does a lot of pro bono work, and they were extremely helpful to us. And
I see. So you have successes under your belt that you can be proud of. Patty, I haven't heard much from you.
There's one aspect of what the Advocacy Center does that I think is underappreciated, even by us who know it well, and that's empowering people with disabilities as part of living with dignity and being included in their communities, is teaching them that they have a voice too. And it's teaching them how to speak up for themselves, whether it's a mother on behalf of her child that needs special education services, or who works in a sheltered workshop, or if it's an individual who just didn't know their rights. But one of the things that the lawyers and the client advocates, in conjunction with the lawyers, do is really try to help the clients find their own voices.
Yes.
And feel like they have the ability and that it's worthwhile enough for them to stand up for themselves. Because so often, I don't know if you've noticed this, and it happens both to people with disabilities and to older citizens, if they're with someone who's able-bodied or younger, people will tend to talk to that person about the elderly person. Or when my mother got to be 80 and we'd go anywhere, she'd be talking and someone would be answering to me.
Yes.
As if she were invisible, and there was nothing wrong with her. And that is very often the case with both with people with visible disabilities, and making people feel good enough about themselves to say, wait a minute, I have rights. I can stand up for myself. I have a right to these things. And to me, that is a beautiful thing.
Well, when you mentioned living with dignity, our organization also supports death with dignity. You know, when there's nothing left but misery or maybe unconsciousness, and we do support the right of a person to end his life with dignity. Do you all face that at all?
one of the services we provide seniors is to assist them in preparing living wills and powers of attorney. We call these advanced directives, so that while you have your cognition, you're able to make decisions about what you would want to happen.
Well, we distribute those kind of forms as well, because it's very important, even if you're not old yet, because you never know what might happen. And if you don't have it in writing and properly written, you don't know what authorities might decide to do with you. Well, we've got about a minute left, so if you want to tell our audience something, or if there's something more you'd like to add, the time is yours.
Simply that we have informational sessions called PPODs. They're about an hour long. If people want to know more about what we do or how they can get involved with our organization, they can give us a call or get online and see us on our website.
All right, give us your web address and if you want to, a telephone number.
The website is advocacyla.org.
AdvocacyLA altogether.
Yes.
.org. That
Right.
should be easy to remember.
And then on there will be a list of these informational sessions. We also are able to go out into the community. If you belong to an organization and you'd like us to come and deliver that information, we can do that too.
I see. And does this take place in other parts of the state, or is it?
It can.
Yeah, okay, but primarily these sessions you're talking about are the New Orleans area, is that right?
We have gone on the road to Thibodaux just recently, and we went to Lafayette.
I see.
So we're
you do a road show.
We have a version in our office, and we have a version that we take on the road. It's easier and more cost-effective to do it closer to home, but we can go anywhere we're asked.
Well, it's been a pleasure talking to you, and I think we have many common interests which have to do with people living gratifying lives. And doing what we can to help in that respect. And I want to thank all you folks who watch our show, and remember contacting the Advocacy Center, because they and we rely upon the kindness of strangers, if I
Certainly
could
do.
use